Are you perceptive enough to recognize when a sweet slice of cake is hiding an entire system built on lies? Have you ever taken a bite of a familiar slice of pie only to suddenly realize something feels off? That strange sensation creeping up your throat, where sweetness is supposed to evoke warm memories, instead makes you pause as if someone just distorted the truth. That day, at a Hearthstone bakery in Greenville, during an ordinary afternoon when no one paid much attention, a 47-year-old man sat quietly in the corner of the shop, holding a silver fork and a slice of apple pie, a dessert tied to his childhood, his family, and his legacy. His name was Miles Everett. No tie, no suit, no assistant hovering nearby. Miles wore a wrinkled shirt and old khaki pants. He looked like any passerby stopping in for a bit of sweetness at the end of the day. But what no one in that bakery knew was this: Miles was the very man who built the Hearthstone bakery chain from his mother's tiny kitchen, turning it into a national brand with over 600 locations across the US. And today, he came back not to eat, but to test. The slice of apple pie was brought out looking perfect. Golden crust glowing under caramelized sugar, with a soft trace of cinnamon drifting in the air. It looked exactly like the pies Miles once taught his baking teams to make. But the moment he cut into it, the filling oozed out like a shapeless brown jelly. There were no apple slices, no subtle contrast between crisp crust and tender fruit. Just a syrupy artificial goo, the color of amber. Something that felt like it came from a can, far from any kitchen he had ever known. Miles said nothing. He simply lifted a piece to his mouth and took a small bite. Instantly, his body reacted. An aggressive sweetness, sharp and hollow, with none of the soft finish of real sugar. Something chemical, heavy, settled at the back of his throat like a lie. For over 20 years, Miles had tasted every batch before signing off on any recipe for mass production. He could identify apple varieties by aroma alone, detect the balance of cinnamon and nutmeg with a single bite. And this wasn't his pie. But he didn't get angry. He didn't stand up and shout or call for the manager to make a scene. Instead, he pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and took a close-up photo of the cut-open slice. In the dim lighting of a bakery bearing his name etched on the logo, Miles whispered to himself, "Someone thought I'd never come back." They were wrong, and they would pay for it, because he hadn't just eaten a pie. He had uncovered a betrayal wrapped in dough and scented with fake flavor. And the founder's investigation had just begun. Miles Everett remained seated at table number 4, a spot that offered a clear view of nearly the entire bakery. In front of him sat the half-eaten slice of apple pie, its artificial filling oozing out as damning evidence of something deeply wrong. But the issue wasn't just in the taste. It lay hidden in the numbers, the contracts, and the people behind the counter. With calm precision, he lifted the white porcelain plate off the tray, and beneath it, a sloppily folded napkin revealed a glimpse of something unexpected. A small internal label. Sunfield Imports, Apple Pie Mix, code LO3821. Miles frowned. Sunfield? That name didn't exist on Hearthstone's approved supplier list. The brand had only 2 authorized partners, both family-run orchards in Oregon and Vermont that used 100% fresh ingredients and swore off any synthetic additives. Sunfield had never been approved, and if this pie came from them, then someone had secretly slipped a rogue supplier into the distribution chain. A move that not only breached contract terms, but posed serious legal risks. Miles snapped a photo of the label, then opened his phone and quickly texted Marla, the vice president of operations, who had been quietly collaborating with him on this undercover audit of their bakery network. Seconds later, the familiar 3 dots appeared on screen. Then her message came through. Sunfield has never been in the system. No record, no history. I'm tracking the origin now. He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the plate. This was no longer about a bad slice of pie or a careless prep shift. This was a deliberate switch. Someone had knowingly replaced the core ingredient of the brand, something no one should have dared to touch. But they had. They gambled with customer trust in favor of profit, and they assumed he wouldn't notice. He smirked, not out of anger, but at the eerie silence with which this location seemed to operate. Staff indifferent, surfaces spotless. But beneath it all, a system was decaying. He didn't yet know who was behind it, but he knew one thing for certain. Apple pie was sacred. And from this moment forward, that slice had become the first piece of evidence. The investigation was officially underway, and he would dig until he hit the roots. No one in the bakery knew that the man in the faded shirt, holding a silver fork and sitting quietly by the window, was the very founder of the entire dessert brand they served every day. But for Miles Everett, anonymity was a weapon. He didn't need anyone to recognize him. What he needed was to observe, to listen, and to uncover the truth hidden beneath those picture-perfect crusts. And that truth, he felt it the moment he stepped into the shop. Not because of the indifferent glances from staff, not because of the fingerprint-smudged pastry case or the faint scent of burnt caramel in the air, but because of the strange tolerance that hung over everything. A kind of silence that felt too smooth, too spotless, like something rehearsed to perfection. Miles had overseen hundreds of locations like this. He knew that when things were too quiet, too flawless, it was usually because someone was doing a very good job of hiding something. His eyes stopped at the frosted glass door at the back of the store, marked in small letters, "Authorized personnel only." Behind it was the office of Karen Lofton, the store manager who had been with Hearthstone for nearly a decade. On paper, she was impeccable, efficient, steady, spotless. But lately, the financial reports from this location told a different story. Profits rising, ingredient costs falling, no staff reductions, no cuts to promotions, and most telling of all, no requests for support. Numbers that looked too good often hid things that were very bad. Miles gently set his fork down, pulled out his phone, and dialed a familiar number. The reception desk of this very branch. The ringtone echoed. Behind the frosted glass, a shadow moved. The woman in a plum-colored cardigan picked up. "This is Karen Lofton. How may I help you?" Her voice was calm, perfectly in line with the service tone he had once required across the entire company. But his reply brought dead silence. "Karen, this is Miles Everett. I'm sitting at table 4 by the window. I just ate a slice of apple pie made with filling from Sunfield Imports. We need to talk." Through the glass, he saw her eyes sweep the shop until they locked onto him. She froze, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. The distance between observer and observed vanished. Miles gave a small, polite nod. But inside that gesture was a cold message. The crust has cracked, and the truth is about to be peeled back, one layer at a time. Karen Lofton stepped out of her office with a face that had regained its professional composure, her posture upright and her smile perfectly suited for greeting VIP guests. but her eyes could not hide the shock when they met the calm, steady gaze of the man sitting at table 4. Miles Everett said nothing, simply gesturing to the empty seat across from him. Karen sat down, carefully adjusting her cuff, though her hands, clenched tightly in her lap, betrayed the tension she was trying to contain. On the table, the half-eaten apple pie still sat, its thick, syrupy filling oozing out, an unspoken testament to something that had no place in any kitchen bearing the Hearthstone name. Miles gently pushed the plate toward her, still silent. Karen looked at him, then at the pie, forcing a smile. "Mr. Everett, if I had known you were coming, I assure you we would have been better prepared." The small talk didn't faze Miles. He responded with a single sentence, his voice low and even. "Eat it." Karen froze for a moment, then cautiously picked up the fork, cut a small bite, and brought it to her mouth. She chewed, longer than necessary, as though stretching out the moment before she had to speak. At last, she said, "It tastes a little sweeter than usual, but sometimes sugar batches vary slightly in flavor." Miles cut her off before she could finish. Not if the recipe is followed. Not if the ingredients come from approved vendors. And certainly not if you're using fresh apples like the system requires. He pulled a small sticker from his pocket, the label reading Sunfield Imports, Apple Pie Mix, code LO3821, and placed it gently on the table. "Explain this." Karen looked down at the label, then up again. She hesitated for a moment before answering slowly. "We were having trouble ordering from our usual supplier. Sunfield was a temporary solution. Cheaper, faster delivery." Miles's tone remained level, not loud, not angry, but each word pierced the air like a needle. No request for change, no update to the system, no report to operations. And this label, how long were you planning to hide it under the plate? Karen took a deep breath. For the first time since leaving her office, her gaze truly faltered. "I just wanted to keep the store running, avoid waste, reduce loss." "You wanted to protect revenue," Miles interrupted. "But you did it by altering core ingredients, without disclosure, assuming I'd never notice." He tapped the table lightly, each tap carrying weight. "But I did notice. And this isn't just a recipe violation. This is a calculated betrayal." Karen said nothing. She simply lowered her head, her eyes avoiding the sharp gaze that now felt as precise and cold as a paring knife. In that small room, the pie had become the witness, and the fork, the confession. The next morning, a man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a name tag that read Mr. Jameson, walked into the Hearthstone store in Greenville. He was dressed simply in an internal inspection uniform, a navy polo shirt, khaki pants, holding a clipboard with a badge around his neck that read Quality Assurance, Regional Inspector. No one in the store recognized that he was actually Miles Everett. No one questioned his unannounced visit either. It was standard protocol for the company's quality control system to ensure surprise evaluations. A young employee named Luca led him to the back and whispered, "Ms. Lofton said everything is stored digitally, but if you need physical documents, I can unlock the cabinet." Miles nodded and logged into the computer. Marla had already installed a back door in the system. With just a few keystrokes, he gained access to the entire history of transactions, purchase orders, and inventory logs. At first glance, everything looked pristine. Orders were recorded from the 2 approved vendors, Valley Farm and Prescott Orchards, just as the company policy required. But Miles knew something was being hidden. He searched for a hidden folder labeled Vendor Alt, something Marla had warned him about. As expected, an entirely different world opened up. Inside that folder was a parallel series of orders, fully dated and authorized, but all from Sunfield Imports, an unapproved supplier with no inspection records, no entry in the company's central finance system. Even more troubling, these invoices were tagged with a fictitious initiative called Local Product Initiative, making it seem like an in-house sustainability project. The disguise was sophisticated enough to avoid system detection, as long as no one dug deeper. Miles printed several invoices, clipped them to his clipboard, and quietly shut down the computer. He said nothing, showed nothing, but inside him, every joint in his body seemed to grind with tension. He stood up and asked Luca for access to the stock room. Inside, among crates labeled with the official Hearthstone suppliers, he found a series of plain white boxes, unmarked except for a small handwritten code in black marker in the corner. LO3821. The exact same code as the pie filling he had tasted the day before. He opened one box. Inside were thick plastic bags filled with pale brown apple filling, with no apple slices, no FDA label, no source of origin. Miles didn't need chemical analysis. One look told him everything. This wasn't pie. It was deception, packaged as truth. And now, he had the proof in hand. Thursday morning arrived under a blanket of mist. The Hearthstone store was still quiet when a white truck, unmarked and unbranded, pulled up silently at the back entrance. Miles Everett, still in the role of Inspector Jameson, stood near the beverage counter, watching from a distance. A staff member whispered, "Delivery's early today." No one looked surprised. No one asked questions. Karen Lofton appeared almost as soon as the truck stopped. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were more guarded than usual. She didn't greet anyone or make any announcement, only delivered a cold instruction. "Everyone stay up front. I'll handle this." She personally dragged a large box from the truck into the cold storage room and locked the door by hand. Miles stepped forward, voice calm as ever. "I'd like to see the invoice for this delivery." Karen turned around, her face unreadable. "Everything has already been entered into the system," she said. "I need a hard copy. It's a mandatory part of random inspections." Her eyes hesitated for a split second. "Not necessary. Our location runs fully digital." The answer was delivered too firmly to feel natural. Miles didn't argue. He simply nodded and smiled. "Then I'd like to speak with you in the break room, privately." Once the door closed behind them, he removed the name tag that read Jameson and gently placed it on the table next to his real one. Miles Everett, founder and CEO. Karen didn't say a word for 3 full seconds. Then she looked up, her face pale. "I thought you looked familiar," she murmured. "But not enough to be afraid at the right time," Miles replied. "I want you to tell me the truth. How long? How many locations?" Karen paused, then spoke slowly. "We were just trying to survive. Apple prices went up 60% in 1 year. If I followed the old protocol, I'd be in the red by the first quarter. And no customers ever complained. Because they trusted you," Miles cut in. "They trusted that when they walked into a Hearthstone bakery, they were eating the same kind of pie I once baked with my mother in a cramped kitchen in Des Moines. You didn't just swap ingredients. You sold out the soul of this brand." Karen leaned back in her chair and exhaled deeply. "I didn't think you'd come. No one thought you still cared about the small stores." Miles looked her square in the eye. I don't care about the stores. I care about the promises. And you shredded a promise my family spent 20 years building and keeping. Karen Lofton was still frozen in her chair when 3 short, firm knocks echoed through the room. The break room door opened, and a young employee named Marcus stepped in, his face tense. "Sorry to interrupt," he said softly, eyes avoiding direct contact. "Someone from headquarters just arrived. It's Ms. Marler and 3 others. I think they're from legal and security." The atmosphere in the room instantly grew heavier. Karen inhaled sharply, her practiced smile fading, replaced by a blank, distant look. Miles Everett stood up without a word, gently retrieved the CEO name tag from the table and pinned it back onto his chest. He was no longer Mr. Jameson. He had returned to himself, the man who built the entire Hearthstone chain from nothing, and the only one with the authority to decide the fate of this location. Outside, the storefront still had a few unsuspecting customers. The staff whispered among themselves, eyes drifting toward the office. Marla, composed and holding a thick folder in her hands, stood near the entrance with 3 individuals in dark legal department coats, politely handing out refund vouchers and company apologies as they asked the customers to leave. Once everything was cleared, the overhead lights shone directly down onto the bar area, where all staff were asked to gather. Miles stepped into the center of the circle. No microphone, no dramatic music, just his calm, steady voice that made the entire room fall silent. "I'm Miles Everett," he began, "founder of the Hearthstone chain, and today I'm not here for an inspection. I'm here because of a betrayal." Some froze, others swallowed hard. For months now, ingredients of unknown origin have been funneled into our system. Records have been forged. A shadow operation has been built to deceive this company. But I also believe most of you had no idea this was happening. He scanned the faces of every employee. Some looked down, others anxious, some simply confused. Then he turned to Marla and nodded. She stepped forward, her voice clear. "The entire team will be placed on paid leave during the investigation. Those who cooperate honestly will be considered for reinstatement once the store reopens. Anyone found directly involved will be dealt with according to internal policy and the law." Karen had now stepped out from the office, standing silently at the back like a fading shadow. All eyes gradually turned toward her, but no one spoke. No one said her name. They didn't need to. Miles looked at her, then turned back to the group. "If you've ever wondered whether anyone is listening, whether anyone is watching, the answer today is yes. We have been listening, but maybe not closely enough." He paused, and in that pause, the silence that settled over the room was no longer fear. It was anticipation, as if everyone understood that a moment of change had arrived. Miles ended with a single line, quiet yet far-reaching. "Today we are not shutting down a bakery. We are closing a broken chapter to begin a new one, where promises are kept, just like they were on the very first day." And with that, he stepped out of the circle, leaving behind a team slowly realizing that the truth does not need to scream. It only needs someone brave enough to speak. 3 months after the sudden closure of the Hearthstone branch in Greenville, the storefront had completely transformed. The frosted glass that once concealed the kitchen was now replaced with a transparent floor-to-ceiling window, allowing customers to clearly see every step, from dough mixing to the moment the pie was lifted from the oven. There were no more dark corners to hide mistakes, no more closed doors to avoid questions. Every ingredient in the kitchen was marked with a bright red QR code linked directly to the company's traceability system, showing where the apples were picked, when the butter was churned, and the exact dates of delivery and quality inspections. Nothing was hidden. This wasn't just operational improvement. It was an apology expressed through action. Miles Everett stood next to the prep counter, wearing a simple shirt and holding a cup of coffee, watching as the oven signaled that a fresh batch was ready. Dion, who used to work the night shift and was now the official manager, opened the oven and carefully pulled out a tray of apple pies. The familiar aroma filled the room. Warm cinnamon, the gentle sweetness of unsalted butter, and the comforting scent of thinly sliced apples layered by hand. "We're back," Dion said with a small smile. "Sales are up 32%. Most of the customers have returned. They're not just buying pies. They came back to see if they could still believe." Miles nodded, his eyes moving from the tray to the front of the shop, where Tasha, the once timid new hire, now stood confidently leading a group of school children on a tour. She pointed at charts distinguishing natural from artificial ingredients, her voice clear and calm as she explained how a simple filling once betrayed a brand, all because of a seemingly harmless shortcut. A young girl raised her hand and asked, "Sir, did you catch the person who did it?" Miles smiled and walked toward the group, his gaze softening. "Yes," he said. "But what matters more is that we learned the lesson. Not just who did it, but why it happened and how to make sure it never happens again." He raised a hand and pointed to a newly hung sign just behind the kitchen, visible to anyone who walked in. "Integrity is the ingredient you can't fake." That phrase was no longer just a slogan. It was the new foundation. After the group left, the warmth in the store remained. Old staff, new hires, all were busy, but no longer with a sense of obligation. They laughed, asked each other small questions, wiped down counters, and shared shifts. Miles sat at the window table, the very spot where he first uncovered the fake pie slice. An elderly man at the next table placed his slice onto a plate, took a bite, and nodded. "This is it," he said to the server, "the taste my wife loved. I knew I remembered it right." Miles turned, gave a small nod, eyes filled with gratitude. Later that day, when the staff gathered at the counter for a brief meeting, Miles stepped forward, holding a wooden plaque. He mounted it on the wall next to the Hearthstone logo and spoke in a voice gentle but firm. 6 months ago, this store almost lost everything. Not because of one big decision, but because of small silences repeated over and over. But some people here chose not to stay silent. Some saw what was wrong and chose not to look away. They are the reason this place isn't just reopening. It's reopening with meaning. The staff applauded. Tasha stood near the counter, hugging her notebook, beaming. Dion said nothing, his eyes misty. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. They weren't just baking to sell. They were rebuilding trust, one batch at a time. When the store closed at 8 p.m., Miles stepped outside and stood beneath the Hearthstone sign. The interior lights reflected against the glass, showing his reflection. No longer just a CEO, but a man who had kept a promise to himself, to his mother, and to the customers, that he would never let anyone trade truth for profit. Then he turned and walked away quietly. Because deep down, he knew. Pie can be sliced. But trust must be kept whole, piece by piece. In business, you can control everything, from costs and staffing to brand marketing. But the one thing you can never fake is trust. A slice of pie can be altered. A recipe can be swapped. But the feeling of betrayal in a customer's heart is never temporary. Trust doesn't live in the balance sheets. It lives in the smallest details. How you choose your ingredients, how you listen to those who stay silent, and how you respond when the truth is distorted. If you believe that transparency is a core value, not just in recipes, but in company culture, then like this video, subscribe to the channel to follow real stories and powerful lessons from behind the scenes of a brand. And don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Can't fake it," if you too believe that some things can only be preserved through integrity.